The Cleveland Cavaliers tie their franchise record start in 8-0 back in 1976 and 1977. It wasn't during the LeBron years. That's kind of surprising. But they're 8-0 and have an opportunity to be 9-0 for the first time ever in franchise history, and they'll play the New Orleans Pelicans on Wednesday to see if they could do that. We'll have to see what happens with the Cavs, but a big win over the Milwaukee Bucks. I should say 2 big wins over the Milwaukee Bucks. Donovan Mitchell, of course, with that game winner the other day. Also, let's talk about New Orleans. Speaking of New Orleans, outside of the Pelicans, who the Cavs play, the Saints have fired Dennis Allen. It's the second time he's been fired from a head coaching job, and the second time with Derek Carr as his quarterback. Surprising game against Carolina for them. We know how high I was on the Saints at the beginning of the year. I think Derek Carr's injury had a little bit to do with that, but the Saints are clearly on their way down the hill. You look at the Browns, they had an awful week against the Los Angeles Chargers, whose defense is really good, and they're a sneaky good team who I think is going to make a wild card berth. Also, we got to keep in mind that the Bengals and Ravens play on Thursday, and that's a big AFC North game. The Bengals have a lot to prove because they really need to go on a magical run down the stretch, but the Ravens, they also have a lot to prove because they're coming off of a loss to the Browns last week, but then they just blow out Denver out of nowhere. Any given Sunday in the NFL, and it may be any given Thursday. Can the Bengals recover because they truly lost a disastrous game to Baltimore earlier this season? It's Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. I'm Andrew Hoty. Let's get to the news. Welcome to Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. As always, like, comment, and subscribe on this video for more Raw Takes. You'll get that if you subscribe, so please make sure to do so. Also, check us out on social media. You can find all the links to my social media pages in the description, so make sure to check that out. But you can find me on Twitter/X at HotyAndrew, Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty on Facebook, and on Instagram at Hoty Raw Takes. I post a lot of reels there. I post a lot of sports thoughts there in depth as we do this show 3 times a week now, keeping it on that consistent basis. So thank you very much for tuning into Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. I should say we do it technically 2 times a week, and then we do short takes on the weekend. But it's technically 3 videos all in one. But we can explain all that nitty-gritty stuff another day. Hope everyone is having a wonderful Tuesday here on Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty, and thank you for tuning in. Let's start things off with the Cleveland Cavaliers. They're 8-0. Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Jared Allen. That core 4 group of guys has been on fire. You look at Dean Wade, who's been a great 5th option. Should Dean Wade be the 5th starter over Max Strus? I know Max Strus is injured, so that's something we could talk about with the Cleveland Cavaliers down the line. The Cavs have the best record in the NBA overall. Only the Celtics in the Eastern Conference are worse than them right now. And I think we expected the Boston Celtics to kind of be back in that conversation for another title. But you also have to look at the Oklahoma City Thunder as the other undefeated team, and that's out in the Western Conference right now. They are really good, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander being the superstar he is and Chet Holmgren being a great number 2 option for them, who I think is also going to be a superstar with Oklahoma City, and eventually they may win that title because that franchise, for not winning a title with all the talent they've accumulated over the last 15 years, is honestly criminal. So we'll see what happens with the Oklahoma City Thunder. But you look at the Cleveland Cavaliers too at 8-0. They have their core 4 guys, and the core 4 has been working so far. It's still early in the NBA season. Like I said before, if I were to pick today, I probably would say the Cavs are a second round out but have a great regular season. So far that's coming to fruition. I think the core 4 has some flaws that we'll find out later on in the year about, but the Cavs have still been playing great, and good basketball teams obviously start 8-0 in the NBA, and especially teams that are going to have a great regular season. You look at the Milwaukee Bucks a few years ago. Obviously not now because they've been pretty awful, and obviously Giannis Antetokounmpo going down with an injury. I think it's just days before they fire Doc Rivers because he does not need to be the Milwaukee Bucks coach any longer. Damian Lillard's been playing really well too, so there's a lot of flaws coaching, I think, going on with Milwaukee. But going back to the 2018-2019 season, the Bucks had a 44-38 record back in 2016-17, or 2017-18, pardon me. But and then 2018-19 they came around, and they ended up the best team in the Eastern Conference. They went from 44-38 to 60-22, a turnaround like that within a year. The Cleveland Cavaliers at 48-34 could turn around very much so. And I think in the regular season, the Cavaliers are capable of winning 60 games. I think they could do it. Will they? Remains yet to be seen. I think the Cavs are a very good regular season team, though. Will it pan out in the postseason? I think outside of one playoff series, probably not. But having said that, the Cavs are still a phenomenal regular season team from what I've seen so far, and think they will continue that momentum going into the winter months. They're just fun. I mean, you see Donovan Mitchell play so freely. He's happy here in Cleveland. He's even said it numerous times. He likes rooting for the Browns. He likes rooting for the Guardians. He's a huge baseball fan. We know a lot of people saw him throw that first pitch with the Mets. Obviously, we know his dad's affiliation with New York, and so I'm not mad at Donovan Mitchell for any of that. I know some people in Cleveland were questioning it. I don't really care. I think Donovan Mitchell is a superstar in the league. I think he's truly special. He's one of a kind. We haven't seen a guy like him play in Cleveland maybe since Kyrie Irving. You could debate if Kyrie Irving's the second best Cav of all time. Maybe you could say it's Donovan Mitchell, or you could even go back into the Mark Price days or the Austin Carr days, or maybe those are more fan favorites. But obviously LeBron James being the best. You look at the other Cleveland Cavaliers, I think a lot of people would say Kyrie Irving too. If Donovan Mitchell ends up getting a championship, maybe even multiple, you could put Donovan Mitchell in that conversation as well. But the Cavs are just fun. They're just a fun core group of guys to watch. I mean, and they're so likable. Darius Garland was kind of unlikable last year because of the way he was playing, but he hasn't been playing like that anymore. And Evan Mobley has developed into a guy to a degree. I think Evan Mobley could be that superstar player we think he may have been in his rookie year. We saw the potential there. J.B. Bickerstaff, being a defensive-minded head coach, was able to give him those intangibles, and now Kenny Atkinson's going to try to bring that offense out of him. So we're looking at a team that possibly has 4 all-star players. If Dean Wade keeps it up, as I said, he could be a great 5-man on this team. I'm not saying he's an all-star, but damn it, he could be really, really good for the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he could make a really good conversation. And then if you have Max Strus coming off the bench, or maybe Dean Wade, you never know how that ends up working out, but those could be 6 Man of the Year candidates right there if the Cleveland Cavaliers keep up with what they're doing. They're obviously very well coached. Kenny Atkinson right now is my Coach of the Year candidate because I think a lot of people just have questions about the core 4 right now. Those questions have been answered. But this team still has yet to win a championship, and because of the flaws with the core 4 that we already know about, that's why I'm hesitant to say this is a finals contending team. But great regular season basketball is still a great step in the right direction. We saw great Januaries the last few months from the Cleveland Cavaliers. Well, years, I should say. Not months, but the last few years we've seen some great Januaries out of the Cleveland Cavaliers. We need to see great regular seasons as a whole. And while 48-34 is a good record, 51-31 a few years ago, a great record. Those are great regular season basketball teams that win championships. I mean, obviously we've seen teams get 50 wins and still win titles before, but I mean, to get 60 wins, to get 58 wins, I think the Cleveland Cavaliers, I honestly put them on that pedestal. I think they could be that good of a regular season team this year. I think the Boston Celtics are also going to be a great regular season team, but that's a talk for another day. This is a really good basketball team. They have a lot of energy, a lot of fun, a lot of guys playing a lot of great minutes and time and offense. It's well coached, it's fun, but there's still going to be some losses here and there, and we're going to ask some questions about if the Cleveland Cavaliers could keep that up. And that's where I go back to the postseason translation. I'm not so sure that if the Cavs end up having the great regular season I think they're going to have, that's going to translate in possible playoff series wins. I just am not sure about that. It remains yet to be seen, but we can get a little bit of glimpse about what the Cavaliers maybe could do in the postseason from what we see in the regular season. And they have a darn good regular season, and guys struggle against them on other teams. Like, so far, Milwaukee's been outmanned. I know Milwaukee is off to a rough start. I think the Bucks, after they fire Doc Rivers and Giannis gets healthy, with Damian Lillard still in the lineup, that team could go places. I think they do rebound from a rough start this year. But right now, the Cavaliers just are on fire. And if they win against New Orleans on Wednesday, which I think they could do, then we got to celebrate the Cavs' best start to the regular season in franchise history. That's kind of where my focus is right now with the Cavs. They can get that going, and I think they will. And as I said before, if this team goes 60-22, I'm not going to be surprised at all. The Cavs have great regular season energy. Will it translate in the postseason? Remains yet to be seen. Donovan Mitchell, though, we have to remember is a superstar so far, 3-7 in the postseason. He is typically a good postseason performer, but he hasn't been on those superstar great teams yet. And the Utah Jazz had an opportunity in the Western Conference a few years ago with Donovan Mitchell, but they lost to the LA Clippers in 6 games. Now, the LA Clippers are a shell of themselves now, and Donovan Mitchell's no longer in the Western Conference, but the Jazz were at a ceiling at one point. They were a great regular season team, but they were just not postseason capable. And I think that's possible with the Cavaliers. But let's just enjoy this for what it is. The Cavaliers are possibly on their way to the best start they've had in franchise history, and I'm rooting for it on Wednesday night. So go Cavs, and we'll have to see how this pans out in the rest of the NBA. Now let's get to some football. I think really right now in the heat of the moment with the trade deadline approaching, Dennis Allen getting fired from the New Orleans Saints, I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. He was one of my coaches that I had on the hot seat. If you go back and watch that video that I did, the first Raw Takes I did, when I gave out my thoughts on who coaches on the hot seat were, Dennis Allen was one of them, and it was for this very reason. Now, the Saints, I did nothing but commend them at the beginning of the year after they beat the Cowboys, who I thought were a good team at the beginning of the season. The Cowboys clearly are not panning out that way, and obviously they blew out Carolina week 1. And you can never trust the beginning of the season. I've really learned more and more. But at the same time, with Derek Carr under center, the Saints had a really good roster. On paper, this is a really good roster. I think Derek Carr getting hurt the Saints' chances a little bit. I think Tampa Bay and Atlanta being a lot better than anyone thought. Although Tampa Bay is starting to kind of get down to earth as a mediocre football team. I think the Atlanta Falcons are clearly the favorites right now in the NFC South. On paper, they are absolutely the best team, and I think they will win that division. But having said that, the New Orleans Saints losing 7 straight games doesn't help you save your job. And Dennis Allen clearly had some coaching flaws that he made in that game against Carolina yesterday, where the Panthers ended up winning it. And credit to Dave Canales and the Carolina Panthers, and Bryce Young even, for a really good win. I still think the Panthers on paper are terrible, but they have a lot of rebuilding to do. They started off in a really bad position. Dave Canales, as I said, he's in a really bad position with a really bad organization in Carolina. New Orleans is a really good organization, and I think they'll figure things out slowly but surely, but they're a shell of themselves right now. They really are. Now, it'll be interesting to see what the New Orleans Saints do down the stretch here. They do play the Cleveland Browns coming up. The Browns are on their bye week, so our next game is actually in New Orleans, and with a new head coach underway, at least an interim coach for the New Orleans Saints, I'm not so sure I like the Browns' chances in a dome. I guess it's Jameis Winston's kind of revenge game, maybe. I feel like that'd be more Tampa Bay, but, the New Orleans Saints and Jameis Winston making his return there. We'll have to see how that game pans out. Obviously, Jameis Winston's used to that loud environment down there, and he had a really bad game on Sunday. But like I said earlier on Raw Takes, I kind of bought into the Jameis Winston hype a little bit. The Browns got destroyed on Sunday. And it's because the Chargers' defense is one of the best in the NFL. I don't think people are talking about it enough, how good their defense is. They allowed 20 points once this season against the Pittsburgh Steelers in a game they lost. That was it. They have not allowed 21 or more points. That's how good the Chargers' defense has been. Not even against the Kansas City Chiefs, who are undefeated. So I really like where the Chargers' defense is right now, and I think they're absolutely a wild card team. They're very well coached under Jim Harbaugh. Justin Herbert makes really good plays, and he showed it against the Browns the other day. The Browns haven't beaten the Chargers since 2016, and they were still in San Diego when they beat them. And that was the year the Browns went 1-15 in 2016. So history has not been on their side against the LA Chargers. But having said that, the Browns were so bad in that game, and it wasn't Deshaun Watson being the only problem. This offense just looks inept. Ken Dorsey right now, I think, is the worst head coaching hire. No, the worst offensive coordinator hire. It's awful. The worst offensive coordinator hire in football right now is Ken Dorsey. It's awful, and we see what Buffalo's offense has been able to do without him. Buffalo scored 30 points against the Dolphins the other day, which is to be expected because the Dolphins aren't very good. But, the Bills' offense is just taken off. And Ken Dorsey comes to Cleveland, and he's ruined another offense. And I think Kevin Stefanski is going to try to make Ken Dorsey more so the scapegoat than anything if it comes down to him. As I said numerous times, and I still stick by it, Kevin Stefanski should not get fired. This is not his fault. This is the team construction. And it's bad. And the Browns are going to have to make some difficult moves here at the deadline, which stinks. But will it make us better for the future? Who knows? The Browns, as of right now, are going to have a high draft pick. Do they draft a quarterback? They have to eat this Deshaun Watson money. And if Deshaun Watson comes back, who knows if Deshaun Watson's ever going to look like his Houston form again? It clearly looks like that's not the case. I'm actually not willing to say Deshaun Watson is done yet. And because the Browns are essentially committed to him, they're stuck anyway. But it also comes down to because you're stuck to this Deshaun Watson contract, and we've seen that this Stefanski-style offense doesn't work with Deshaun Watson, are the Browns going to make Kevin Stefanski the scapegoat here? Which stinks for Kevin Stefanski. As a Browns fan, I can tell you, I'm so sick of firing coaches and bringing new people in. And Andrew Berry, I hate to say it, as good as I think he's been in free agency and in the trade market, he doesn't really draft very well. We're questioning Jedrick Wills Jr. We're questioning a lot of these guys that he's drafted. Anthony Schwartz was a problem, and he drafted him late. They obviously cut bait with him. Cade York, they drafted a kicker in the 4th round, and he didn't pan out. He had one good moment against Carolina, won you a ball game, but Kate York's a disaster. I think a lot of that also was just, it got to his head a little bit and all that kind of stuff. But, it's a problem the way Andrew Berry drafts to a degree. So if I'm Jimmy Haslam, I might be considering making some changes, coaching staff-wise and front office-wise. I think it's wrong. I don't think they should. I don't think Jimmy Haslam has any reason to do that because they've done a great job overall with a head coach who's been the head coach 2 times in the last 4 seasons, head coach of the year. So I think it's ridiculous that this is even a situation right now. I've never seen a Kevin Stefanski team play this bad. And they extended him in the offseason, and I know a lot of people were talking about how it was well-deserved, and I thought it was too, but it made me a little hesitant. A, because the extension took so long, and B, because no one really thought of this kind of scenario happening. I really think a lot of people thought the Browns were either going to have a good season or they were just going to be okay. They're a disaster. The Browns are awful. Nothing about them outside of maybe a few highlights from Jameis Winston. Myles Garrett was a machine the other day. I do want to give him credit. But this defense has gone downhill too. And we haven't talked about that enough with Jim Schwartz being the DC right now. Jim Schwartz, his defense, has not been shutting down opponents like they were last year. And it's relatively a lot of the same players. So are they going to make some adjustments over there? We are hearing rumors of Zadarius Smith being on the table to go to the Detroit Lions, who may be the best team in football right now. It's a weird situation for everybody. So if I'm the Browns right now, I stick it out with Stefanski. Andrew Berry, I think, is actually more so on the hot seat and might be the scapegoat along with Ken Dorsey. But this is really a tricky situation right now. And if I'm Jimmy Haslam, as the owner of the Browns, I know that Kevin Stefanski has been my best head coach since you bought the team in 2012. He's been the best head coach since Al Lerner brought the team back to Cleveland and Randy Lerner took over after Al died. I mean, it's just been a disaster. So, to me, getting rid of a coach that's been as good as Kevin Stefanski is honestly criminal. Why would you do that? I don't think Jimmy Haslam would be afraid to because he's done it so many times in the past. But I just don't think you can. I really don't. He's been that good of a head coach. And so I am not putting any of the season on Stefanski whatsoever. And like I said before, the talk of the town is if Stefanski gets fired, he's just going to get hired right away. So why fire him to begin with? Unless you really, really just want to rebuild this thing and start from scratch. And with the Deshaun Watson money you're eating up, you can't do that. But if you can bring in a coach that maybe gets Deshaun Watson on the right track, then you have something to talk about there, which I think is possible. And Kevin Stefanski's offense may just not work for Deshaun Watson, so maybe you have to cut bait. It's really a tricky situation. As I said, I'm not rooting for Kevin Stefanski to be fired. I want him to stay more than anybody probably in town right now because I think he's been that special to the Cleveland Browns. And it's a darn shame that the way this team has been constructed and the way that ownership has spent money and the way that the stadium situation has gone down, the whole thing as a scenario has turned into this. It just really, really is. And I'm not going to criticize everything about the Browns to no end right now, but they're a bad football team, period. They are going nowhere this season. The Bengals, the Ravens, and the Steelers, I think the Bengals could make a run. I'll be honest with you. I think all 3 of those teams are playoff teams right now. If I were to pick who I think would go to the postseason today, I think those 3 are going to go. Because I don't think the Denver Broncos are going to be as good as they've been the last few weeks to start the year. I think they're going to fall apart a little bit at some point because they have a rookie quarterback who hasn't been super duper impressive. So we'll have to see. But the Browns are bad. Everything about them is bad. I just think when you look at the regime under Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry, it's been too good to just let those guys go. And Andrew Berry, as I said, has made some draft mistakes. So maybe he's a scapegoat option. I don't know. But if those 2 guys get fired, it's going to be really hard for me to be on board with whatever the Browns do next because they've done a tremendous job. And I look back at the 2023 season, and I know the 2023 season doesn't matter anymore, but, I mean, you got to be kidding me. This is just ugly football. Ugly football. And how far they've come. And I'm not going to just keep... It's on everybody at the end of the day, but, man, it's really, really sad that the Browns went from being one of the toughest defenses in the NFL. People in town were comparing them to the 85 Bears, which is ridiculous. They're not the 85 Bears, but they were one of the talk of the towns was the Browns defense last year and how good it was. And the rise of 5 quarterbacks being your starters. Really 4 because Jeff Driscoll was the last week of the season. But it's so sad. We've come so far away from what was special last year to this mess. It's unbelievably sad and unbelievable to me that it's this bad. I thought the Browns would at least be a mediocre football team. Maybe 8-9, 7-10. Right now they're looking like they're going to go 4-13, 5-12. It's ugly, it's awful, and it's a sad situation. Not only for Browns fans, but for the organization. I don't see how people don't get fired after this season. Maybe not Stefanski and Barry, maybe so. But like Ken Dorsey's probably not going to be here very long. Jim Schwartz probably will be here and be retained on the staff. I don't see him going anywhere because I think he can make some defensive adjustments and fix that thing right up. But there's going to be scapegoats somewhere. It may be players, it may be coaches. It's ugly. It really, really is. And it's sad for the Cleveland Browns and the fans. I really think so. Let's look at the Thursday night game now between the Bengals and the Ravens, keeping it in the AFC North. The Ravens, to me, got lucky kind of in that Bengals game because Zach Taylor made some boneheaded coaching decisions. I don't know why he kicked the field goal in the position he did when they just ran the clock. And obviously, I don't know what the Bengals were doing with their holder in that game. Joe Burrow did make one poor decision and threw an interception late in that game, which helped the Ravens get back into it. But, to me, the Bengals should have had that game won in Cincinnati. I think the Cincinnati Bengals could go to Baltimore and win that game. I'm actually picking the Bengals to do so. It wouldn't surprise me if the Baltimore Ravens win this game, though. I will say that. But the reason I like Cincinnati in that game is just because I do kind of believe the Joe Burrow mantra of, hey, we could figure this thing out and win some games down the stretch. And you look at the Bengals offense, they're really darn good. It's not it's the defense that really gives them the problems. Their defense stinks. It really does. But their offense is really good. It's really strong. Joe Burrow leads the ship. You have Jamar Chase. You have T. Higgins. I mean, obviously you look at some of the contract situations there. That's been being debated because the Bengals are historically a cheap organization. I just think Zach Taylor right now is the worst coach in the division overall. I actually think Kevin Stefanski is better than him with a worse record just because Kevin Stefanski won an impressive game over the Baltimore Ravens. But Zach Taylor, I think, has lost more games for the Bengals than not by some of his boneheaded coaching decisions. Cincinnati is not known for being an organization that fires coaches right away. We saw that with Marvin Lewis. So I don't know if the Bengals move on from Zach Taylor later this year if they don't make the postseason or they do have a horrible end of the season. But yeah, I think the Bengals right now are kind of in a predicament of their defense stinks. Their offense is really good, but their offense alone can't win you ball games. I know a lot of people put things on the quarterback. Joe Burrow's not at fault for where Cincinnati is right now. And outside of Patrick Mahomes, he's the only other quarterback in the AFC that's gone to a Super Bowl since 2020. So consider that as well. It's just Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. Joe Burrow didn't win the Super Bowl, but he's a Super Bowl contending quarterback, and he deserves a hell of a lot better than what Cincinnati's giving him right now. Baltimore, on the other hand, really good culture, but they're still shaky. I mean, did they really have business losing that game to the Browns? That really wasn't on Lamar Jackson. That was more so the defense didn't get those game-breaking interceptions, and the defense for the Baltimore Ravens, pass-wise, isn't very good. They have a pretty good run defense, but passing teams, they've torched the Ravens a lot this year. That's what the Raiders did to them with Gardner Minshew earlier this year. And that's what the Kansas City Chiefs did to them at the beginning of the season. And the Cincinnati Bengals did that a lot in the game they played against them. The Ravens defense let the Bengals score 38 points, essentially. It was ugly. It was ugly in that game. So I think the Baltimore Ravens defense is very flawed. Offensively, I think they're terrific. Obviously, with Derrick Henry under center. I still think the Ravens right now would win this division. I think Pittsburgh is going to be streaky because they haven't played a divisional game yet. But obviously, Pittsburgh's still in the mix. This game's going to be big for both Cincinnati and Baltimore. And we're going to have to see which one of these teams pulls it out. I like the Bengals in this game just because I don't think the Ravens' defense will hold on like they did against the Browns. It's a tricky defense. Cincinnati's offense will probably outman them, so we'll have to see what takes place on Thursday. But that's a little bit of an early prediction for what's going on into this upcoming week. Obviously, the Browns have a bye week. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they played the Kansas City Chiefs really well yesterday. It wasn't enough. The Chiefs ended up winning the game. And it's just because Mahomes is terrific and Travis Kelce, he's terrific. You look at Kareem Hunt scoring the last touchdown of the game. You look at DeAndre Hopkins and that addition. The Chiefs literally look like they're looking for a kryptonite. They're Superman and they can't find a kryptonite. Someone in this league has to be the Chiefs' kryptonite, and they haven't hit it yet. They could go 17-0 at this rate. I said earlier this year, I could see the Chiefs going 17-0 because no one has stepped up and said it's our time yet. A lot of these teams, I notice, once they play the Chiefs, they fold under center. They get shaken up. They tighten things up a little too much, and they fall apart a little bit. I think Joe Burrow has played the Kansas City Chiefs the best out of anybody this season. And Joe Burrow has a history of playing the Chiefs very well. So, obviously, when you look at Cincinnati, that's pretty much been a little bit of the kryptonite to Kansas City, but eventually not really because Kansas City still has beaten Cincinnati 3 straight times the last meetings they had. Last year, obviously, Joe Burrow was hurt, so you may not count that. But still, looking at Cincinnati, they've essentially been the team to hold Kansas City down, at least in the AFC. But there's one team in particular, I think, that's in the NFC that could have the Chiefs' number, and that's the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions, to me, are possibly the best team in football. They do need that pass rusher. If they go get Zadarius Smith, which I think they're going to work at doing, then I think the Detroit Lions are on another pedestal. And they have the toughest schedule down the stretch. But they just beat the crap out of Green Bay. And before I say anything else before Detroit's tough schedule or whatever, because they do play Minnesota again, they play Chicago twice. And I don't think the Bears are really that good. They do play Houston next week, which may be a little bit of a challenge because Houston's coming off a brutal loss to the New York Jets, which they shouldn't have lost that game, but they did. The Detroit Lions right now, in that Green Bay game, in the conditions, as a dome team, it's any given Sunday in this league. And I mean, the Saints were a dome team and went in the cold weather and beat the Browns a few years ago. So it could happen. Anything's possible in the NFL. But the Detroit Lions is a dome team, made no mistakes in the rain, played excellent football. Jared Goff has thrown more touchdowns than incompletions. He's an MVP candidate, by the way. Jared Goff deserves a lot more credit than when he's been given. He has played his ass off. He really has. He's definitely a comeback player that I think will go down in history for a while. Obviously, with the Detroit Lions, it will for sure. But when the Detroit Lions traded Matt Stafford to the Rams, they won the Super Bowl. Everyone in Detroit was happy about that. And then Jared Goff turned his career around. So, I mean, just looking at Jared Goff throwing more touchdowns than incompletions over the last stretch, and he's only thrown 4 interceptions this year, and all those interceptions were in the first 3 games, in which Detroit still finished 2-1. So Jared Goff hasn't been turning the ball over either. He's really good. And the Detroit Lions played mistake-free football, essentially, against the Green Bay Packers. Obviously, it wasn't perfect. It was 24-14, a relatively close game. But Jordan Love was a mess in that game. He wasn't catching high snaps, or low snaps for that matter. The center was a mess. It was slippery weather in Green Bay. And players were slipping up, running backs were slipping up. The Green Bay Packers looked like they were playing in Sao Paulo, Brazil, again, against the Detroit Lions. They really did. They were slipping up. And so the Packers, I think, are a really good football team. I have them going to the playoffs. They should be just fine. But I think the Detroit Lions are going to sweep them this year. In fact, my bold prediction for the Detroit Lions is they're the best team in the NFC, and they're going to absolutely sweep everybody in the NFC North. I think they're going to win both those games against Chicago. They're going to win the other Green Bay meeting. And I think they'll beat Minnesota at the end of the year because maybe it'll come down to the wire with the Rams, or maybe you look at the East, the Washington Commanders, and they need to get that bye. So they end up beating Minnesota at the end of the season or something. I think they could beat every single one of these NFC North opponents, despite all their records right now. Obviously, Minnesota beat the Colts the other day, but I don't really buy Minnesota one bit. I really don't. Sam Darnold has turned his career around. He's been impressive. And the Vikings are absolutely a wild card contending team. But I don't really buy that. I buy the Green Bay Packers more so. I don't really buy the Bears' chances. I think that's the worst team in that division. And I think we're going to start to see them not only regret drafting Caleb Williams, but we're going to start to see that they should have drafted Jaden Daniels. Because look at what the Washington Commanders are doing right now. I still was in the mentality that they shouldn't have traded away Justin Fields, but if Justin Fields is benched in Pittsburgh right now, maybe Justin Fields isn't the guy either, so maybe the Bears made the right decision to move off him, but they didn't get Jaden Daniels. They got Caleb Williams, who's been very mediocre and unimpressive in my opinion. He's had some decent moments, but Caleb Williams is still a guy I do not buy into with the Chicago Bears. So the Detroit Lions, essentially, it's theirs to lose. They control their own destiny, and they're leading the NFC. And it's incredible to watch the Detroit Lions for the pathetic history that they have as a franchise to really rebuild that thing from the ground up with Dan Campbell and turn themselves into a Super Bowl contending team. And in the NFL, rebuilds do happen quickly, but culture takes a lot of time to overcome. And the Cleveland Browns right now are in a position where this culture has gotten so bad and so negative into that losing mantra. Last year, there's been some breakthroughs, obviously 2020 and 2023, and being mediocre between 2021 and 2022 helped the Browns kind of recover a little bit of culture there, but it takes a lot of time to overcome. And the Browns are still working on doing that. But they have the coach, in my view, that can. But the Detroit Lions were able to do it within a few seasons, and props to Dan Campbell, props to Jared Goff, props to Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's an underrated wide receiver in my view. Sam Laporta is probably one of the best tight ends of football outside of Travis Kelce. Aiden Hutchinson, before he went down, was looking like a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. It's unbelievable what the Detroit Lions have been able to do. They destroyed the Cowboys. They've destroyed the Tennessee Titans. They're destroying bad teams. Heck, they're essentially destroying good teams because I think the Packers are good. But they beat them by 10 points relatively easily. It was only 10 points at the very end. It was 24-6. The Lions destroyed the Green Bay Packers in Green Bay and played mistake-free football, essentially, and did almost everything right. Dan Campbell, for as rah-rah as a guy as he is a damn good football coach. So there's a lot of great stuff to see there with the Detroit Lions. And I'm excited to see what it turns into for them because it's truly an awesome story. They're at 3 playoff wins since 1957. Can they make it essentially 3 more if they get the 1 seed? That makes it 6 and they win the Super Bowl. And I think the Detroit Lions might be the biggest threat to Kansas City if Kansas City goes all the way. Because Jared Goff not only is undefeated against Patrick Mahomes, the Detroit Lions show no fear of slipping up against Mahomes. They show they're going to give it their all, and they're not going to make those mistakes. And we saw last year, even though the Detroit Lions were 12-5 and went all the way to the NFC Championship game, they made a lot of mistakes all the way to that stretch, especially in the NFC Championship game. But the Detroit Lions aren't playing mistake-driven football right now. They're playing really good mistake-free football. It's the biggest turnaround I've seen in a playoff team to probably another playoff team. The Detroit Lions are on absolute fire, and they are really fun to root for. I see them going 14-3 and getting the number 1 seed of the NFC and making a really big playoff run because that team is just fun, energetic, and great, and it's an awesome story. And it's good for the Lions fans, too. They really do deserve it. Outside of Michigan. I don't want to go into Ann Arbor. We'll talk Ohio State another day. But Ohio State obviously getting a win over Penn State. Briefly, saves Ryan Day's job. Still wasn't overall impressed. Will Howard turned the ball over a little bit, so there were some mistakes. But obviously, you look at Penn State, they've struggled against Michigan in the last few years. Coaching decisions, obviously. Of course, their coach is on the hot seat, most likely, too. He can't beat Ohio State and Michigan. But, it's a tough road right now for Ohio State overall. But getting a win over Penn State was really, really important. They got that done. Makes me more optimistic they may be able to beat Indiana and hopefully Michigan, who's had their number for a while now. A lot of football still left to be played in the college ranks. We'll talk about all that later, though. That's going to be it for today's edition of Raw Takes with Andrew Hoty. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and follow me on social media. And the links to social media are right below this video, so make sure to check it out. I'm Andrew Hoty. Those are my Raw Takes, and we'll be back later this week with another edition of the show. Thank you.